Hi there, it's David from helpingfolk.org. I'm starting a video series today and the first episode I'm going to do is going to be about the brain. The idea of doing video blogs as a part of Helping Folk is to try and get kind of very complex ideas to do with neuroscience, psychology, psychotherapy and emotional well-being, but deliver it in a way that you can understand. So I'm not going to go heavy on scientific data and research or anything like that. This is really what Helping Folk's about, is helping the general public understand why we sometimes do what we do, why we sometimes feel the way we do, and how life and our environment impacts us and some of the things we can do to conquer those and to combat them. So today's going to be about the brain basics. The brain is the most complex thing that we know about, to put it in those terms. Within the universe, we still don't know of anything that works in a more complex way than the human brain. So we're not going to get into that because that's the point. I want to make this as simple as possible. So if we think about the brain as having three parts, there's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist called Daniel Siegel who was very well known in the areas of psychiatry and psychology. And he likes to talk to his audiences and explain the brain in three parts, and he uses a hand model. So I'm going to copy him basically by showing you the hand model that he uses of the brain. So if we think about this as our brain, and it is made of three parts. So if we think about our wrist, this area is the brain stem, which would actually go down into our spinal cord, and then we have the limbic system, which goes in the middle, and then if we wrap our fingers over the top there, we have the cortex. And the cortex, when we think about pictures of the brain and we're looking at this kind of complex cauliflowery looking ball, the cortex is kind of what you're seeing and it's lying on top. The cortex is what we kind of call the human brain. The limbic system in the middle is what is known as the mammalian brain, and the brain stem is the reptilian brain. So in terms of evolution, we evolved up and out. The human brain, the cortex, the thinking part of the brain is what makes us different from all of the animals and all of the kind of creatures that crawl the earth. So if we think about this hand model in these terms, the brain stem is the part of the brain, it came first in evolution, so reptilian in terms of, what do reptiles do? You know, reptiles get out of the light, get in the light, get warm, get cold, they feed, they digest. But there's not really much thinking that goes into that, and there's definitely not much relational activity, and there's no building of packs or tribes in order to survive or anything like that. So the brainstem, reptilian, and is in charge of our regulatory systems and digestive systems and our heart rate and keeping us alive and making sure that we kind of have our basic needs met in order to survive on the earth. And then when we move up, we have the limbic system, and the limbic system is the center really for attachment and emotional memory. And so we look at the brain stem as the survival brain, the limbic system as the feeling part of the brain, and then the cortex, the complex cortex on top, is the bit that everybody really likes. So this is a bit that school teachers like, and so passing tests and doing maths and all this kind of stuff is all based within the cortex. So if we understand that as a triune model, a hand model, and the brain is in three parts. So we've got survival, we've got feeling, and then we've got thinking. So when we're born, or in utero I should say, the most affected part of the brain is the brain stem. And the brain stem is the most kind of complete or developed part of the brain when we're born, and those first very, very crucial months and weeks of life. And so pre-birth experience, the mother's environment, surroundings, whether the mother's stressed, whether the mother's supported, or if there's anything going on in the environment that is really hazardous or unwanted, and I'll leave your imagination to think what things like that might be, then that's likely to have a major impact on the brain stem. So when we're seeing a lot of children or adults who kind of struggle to what we call regulate, maybe there's been some impact early on in life that's had an effect on the brain stem. So they might not be able to sit still too well, or they might be fidgeters all of the time, or might not be able to kind of modulate temperature and things like that. So very quickly I'm going to move into the central part. And so the limbic system, within the limbic system, so this is the feeling, the memory, emotional memory, feeling kind of brain, which evolves and grows next. Within that is what's called the amygdala, and the amygdala within the limbic system is in charge of our panic responses. So it sends signals to other parts of the brain to tell us to either fight, flight, or freeze. And then the cortex on top allows us to do what I'm doing now, which is operate things. It allows me to have choice, it allows me to think, it allows me to make decisions in a rational, conscious way. So what happens when we are stressed? What happens when we have a lot of environmental stresses in our lives, either when we're very, very young, or work-related stress, or relationship stress, or just stressful experiences? So I'm not particularly talking about trauma here. I'm talking about general stress, which might move into a chronic stress, or what's known as toxic stress. So if you think this part is the part that keeps us in our day-to-day activities, if something comes into my environment, whether that be a one-off event, like if someone came in here and started shouting at me, that obviously would be unpleasant, and then my brain would try and work out what to do with that information. So all of my senses, so if you think about senses, I have hearing, I have taste, I have smell, I have sight, I have touch. So this is information that's going in to my system all of the time. In fact, there's so much information that I have to delete and generalize most of it. And so my brain has to then work out, is this an experience? So someone coming in and starts shouting at me, is this an experience that I've had before? So have I got files in my brain somewhere where I can connect to, yes, I've had this experience. So was it a safe experience? Was it a bad experience? And so then my brain can start making more decisions. This is all in a microsecond. My brain can start making more decisions about, is it worth repeating, or do I need to get out of here quick, sharp in order to survive? And so what will happen? Someone comes in, they give me something that's threatening, and then the amygdala within the brain will read that this is a threatening situation, and then send cortisol, which is the stress related hormone, and adrenaline through our system, which will then give me the options to either fight, flight, or freeze. Very basically, fight will be to obviously conquer the enemy, or to conquer the obstacle that's in the way. So if you think about times where there might have been saber-toothed tigers walking by or something like that, it's likely that my brain is going to go into a fight, flight, or freeze situation. And so when we're going into high stress situations now, there aren't any saber-toothed tigers walking by, but our brain doesn't really know the difference between what was happening thousands of years ago and what's happening today. And because we actually have threat and we have stress in our life all of the time. In fact, daily life can be threatening, can be stressful sometimes in some households or some work environments, or just walking down the street. So our brain's still doing those basic things. So someone comes in, they give me something that's threatening, I'm likely to fight, i.e. get out of my way, I'm going to overpower you. I've got all of these kind of hormones and brain juice going through me, which is being excreted in order to give me more power and more energy. Or I might want to flight. So my brain makes a very quick decision in terms of get out of there fast. But if I felt like the person who was, or the saber-toothed tiger, or whatever the threat is not something that I can really conquer, this is not something that I can overpower, and I'm in my office at the moment and the windows are shut and they're locked and I can't get by because the door's there and the threat's in the way, then my brain gives me another option, which is the freeze response. And in many respects, that's kind of like the play dead response. So if I freeze, maybe the threat will pass and leave me alone, or maybe it will be like a play dead scenario, and the predator might think that I am a rotting carcass and not worth eating. But it's our last option. So it's not just fight and flight responses, we have the freeze response, and I don't want to get too far into that because then we can start looking at dissociation and other things like that. And so what's stressful now? What's stressful in everyday life in 2017? Relationships, kids, work, The other things that happen that we know about, we don't like to talk about: domestic violence, pressures to do with identity, sexuality. So making money, finances, anything like this is causing stress, but our brain is still using these same primitive systems in order to try and organise us and work out how to deal with it. So if you're feeling stressed a lot of the time, the key thing about this is that the fight-flight system and these responsive systems are kind of set within these parts of the brain. And so our thinking, the cortex, this human part of our brain, has the tendency to not work very well, or sometimes even shut down in high stress scenarios. So threat comes in the room, someone comes in to shout at me or to threaten me in some kind of way. I don't really have the time to work out how to combat this in a conscious, logical way. I'm not going to sit there and think, oh, well, this is dangerous, maybe I have this choice, or maybe I'll choose to do that. So the thinking brain is bypassed. And so that's where the fight, flight, freeze systems kick in. But I don't really have any conscious choice or thought over that. But remember, that's someone who's coming in here and going to do something threatening to me. That's not likely to happen. It'd be very rare for something like that to happen. But if we've got relationship problems, or if we've got work-related stress, or if we've grown up from a very young age where there's been very stressful things in our environment, even pre-birth, what might happen is our thinking in these times is hindered. So work-related stress is something which is constant. It's always going on. If we feel like we've got no power, if we feel like the world's working against us and things are out of our control, you might find that you're starting to suffer or struggle with chronic stress. And chronic stress means that your fight-flight system, your limbic system, is working on overdrive. And then this thinking part of your brain's not working very well at all. In fact, this is why we sometimes, when we're highly stressed, we kind of trip over our tongue. Our memory goes funny. We're clumsy. We walk into things, and we can't rationally work out why we have all this adrenaline or anxiety and big feelings like this. And so stress is very, very damaging to our system. Cortisol is the stress hormone that comes in order to help us combat stress and to kind of put out the fires of stress and to reach equilibrium when something stressful has happened. But too much cortisol can damage our neurological system. And incidentally, as a child, if a child's highly stressed, so if there's things going on during early childhood, or we've got kind of a lot of chaos or domestic violence, or if we've got parents whose the attachment quality is not very good, and the infant feels very, very stressed or picks up the environmental stress, then if you think about the thermostat, the amygdala and the panic response and that fight-flight reactive response, if you think of that as a thermostat, someone who's not had chronic stress in early childhood, someone who's not been massively stressed out for prolonged or traumatic incidents for prolonged periods of time, if we just imagine that kind of stress thermostat, that we kind of teeter on 2 to 3 out of 10, and so we know that we've got our backup default mode to deal with stress, but it's not interfering, it's not intruding into daily everyday life. And so if we are kind of teetering within this response, 2 to 3 out of 10, then if something comes in, it shoots up to 10, it keeps us safe, we go back, and then we kind of reconnect with normal life, we reconnect with people, and everything's all right. If there's stress going on when our brain's forming, when our brain is in utero in the first weeks, months or years of life, then that's having an impact on the development of the brain neurologically. I mean, I watched, there's something I watched on the internet not that long ago actually, where someone was trying to explain that when we're babies, everything's all right, and we didn't always have stress, and that's certainly true for a lot of people, but it's not actually true, neurologically true, for infants that are born with high levels of stress. And that we're not just blank canvases all of the time, because if there's a pre-birth experience of high stress and then the baby comes out and that thermostat, that emotional regulator, or if there's stress within the weeks, months, and within the attachment system, or something's going on within the environment, then that, for you and I, that might be an emotional regulatory setting of 2 to 3, and it can go to 10 when we're in danger. But there's lots of people walking around there who that amygdala thermostat has actually been, due to lots and lots of childhood stress, has been reset because the world is perceived to be at some level dangerous. So I'm making this data up, but if we say that theirs might be on a 4 or a 5 or a 6 permanently, so they're always looking for where the stress is coming from. And then they're finding it very, very difficult to emotionally regulate, whether at school or if they grow up, it might be in relationships or in work environments. And so these people are feeling very, very stressed, and they're affected by their environment in a much more sensitive way than someone who's not had early chronic or traumatic experiences early in life. And so, in essence, the cortex shuts down, doesn't work very well. The thinking part of the brain is not working very well at all in high stress environments. So if you're wondering why I'm feeling so stressed and I can't think straight and I can't read books and I just can't concentrate very well because there's something going on in your life that's been stressful, or maybe it's something that's been exacerbated due to having early childhood stress, whatever that may be, please remember that thinking brain is not really working very well. So I often hear clinically, I often hear the term, it's irrational thinking, the anxiety or the panic attacks or things that are going on in my life. It's irrational thinking. It doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make sense to your cortex. It doesn't make sense to your conscious thinking, but it does make sense to your system, because the threats or stresses in your environment have got neurological pathways or neuro associations to things that have happened in your past, possibly even pre-verbal. So I hope that's helped, just to help you understand a little bit about the brain. And I'm sure people are thinking, how do we deal with this? What can we do if we're feeling chronically stressed? So keep looking on helpingfolk.org, and during a short period of time I'll put more video blogs up to help explain about things that we can do to combat stress and how we can actually become more emotionally regulated, so we're not either shutting down and disconnecting from the world, or we're not going too high where we're always in a hyper-vigilant, fight-flighty kind of state. So keep watching helpingfolk.org and check out the blogs and the video blogs, and I'll keep you posted in things that you can do to kind of combat this and to manage this at a later date. So thank you for listening. This is helpingfolk.org.